Well, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to kind of start out with Nico, a kind of a really nice graphic that's a good overview of basically the entire milking system. And not everybody here is deeply involved in the dairy world. We got Rob on that does a great job in breweries and wineries and other applications, but this is more or less just the kind of knowledge level and share with everybody what we're talking about here. And this is the ProElliot, and a cloud in the center of the diagram here is everywhere in the modern world. And basically that's just offline storage. Instead of being a piece of paper or some piece of hardware located on the farm, all your data, wherever it's coming from, migrates up to the cloud. So it's accessible anywhere. This here represents a plate heat exchanger, milk coming from the milking parlor to a receiving vat, and it's pumped through a plate heat exchanger. And as we go through today's presentation, we'll talk about various points that we can monitor. And this is the pre-cooling section of the plate. This symbol here indicates a monitoring point that we could use, both incoming and outgoing water. We could measure that, but mainly we're interested in what happens to the milk. We know it comes in at 98 degrees. What happens after this section? And then of course, the chiller is what we're mainly going to talk about. We'll spend considerable time looking at the function of the chiller. With me today is Damon Reed. He's a longtime Pro employee, probably most famous for being the long-term head of our service department. He's the guy that gets it going and gets the chiller fixed, is our technical resource. He'll be adding in any of the technical details, but anybody that's really interested in the real technical troubleshooting, dealer-related type of system, on Thursday at the same time as this meeting here, we'll be having another session on ProElliot, but more specifically geared toward what goes on at the technician troubleshooting level. Here, of course, is the milk storage tank, and that's a key point where almost everybody will be interested in recording that temperature. So I just kind of wanted to start at a real high level overview of the system, of what we're talking about. And when we're talking about ProElliot, we're not only talking about monitoring the refrigeration system, but many other things beyond our chiller. So we'll share here again, and Nico, if you could kind of verify that you're seeing, assume that everybody else is seeing my screen.
We got it. Looks great.
So like any other subscription service or internet tool you've got a login page. And what's important to remember here is that it is user specific. There's not one big master login for your system that you would have to share with everybody. And if you're a dairy farmer, you may have a herd manager, a parlor manager, a service provider, a milk inspector you would want to share this information with, or someday in the future, stop sharing your information with. That's the reason it's configured that way, to give you security and dependability to control who has access to your machine. Also, the system can be either Wi-Fi based, using the local internet, either hardwired or over Wi-Fi, but our recommended method of accessing the system is through cellular. And people say cellular is expensive, but the amount of data we're using is very low, and the cost of cellular is negligible increase and provides a lot of added incentive of security. For example, every farm that I go to now for protocol and animal handling measuring has video cameras. Well, if you use the cellular aspect of it, you don't use your computer system at all. So all those cameras, everything that goes on the farm is very confidential. and secure. So our preferred way to go is through cellular connection. What you see here is what you log into. Now, if you're a dairy farmer, you may have one or two locations. Typically, most farms are only going to have one, and we call these things tiles. Now, we're involved here at Pro Refrigeration a lot more than just milk cooling. We're also involved in breweries, dairy farms, vineyards. Childress is a very large wine production facility in North Carolina. Urban Chestnut's a brewery, but specifically here, very topical right now is Medical Teams International. They're a charity that Pro Refrigeration and the Vandergeesen family has been involved with for a long time. And of course, everyone knows that this COVID-19 vaccine has to be maintained at a very low temperature. There's no chiller involved with this system. It's just a traceable device that keeps track of the temperature so that they can verify that the vaccine is efficacious, been stored at the right temperature. Their mission is basically to serve the underserved, homeless people. They do a lot of international work in the developing world, but here domestically, they serve those without access to the medical system. So I'm going to open up a farm here, and we're going to take a look at a very large dairy farm in California. And this is your home screen, or what we would call your tile. A lot of good information here, very high level view. If I'm looking at this the way a dairy farmer would, the first thing I look at is right here at the top. It's green. That means there's no alerts. There's no serious trouble right now. There's nothing that says I've got hot milk or a malfunctioning chiller. And that's as good as it gets as far as we're concerned. If I'm a dairy producer, I probably don't go beyond this in my day-to-day activities. I can look at this, I can have it running in the background, whatever I want to do. The main thing we're concerned about on any dairy farm chiller is the fluid temperature. The chilled glycol solution, this system is set up to maintain 34 degrees. We're within 1/10 of a degree now. You also see the outside temperature. That may not be the weather guy's temperature. It's the local temperature of the chiller. And that's important to remember. If you've got poor ventilation around your chiller, poor airflow, maybe the chiller is indoors, which is common in a lot of our smaller brewery applications. This tells us the environment the chiller's in. This is probably pretty close to what the temperature is in California right now. We're showing about 66 degrees. System mode, we're showing this dairy's basically operating on one unit, number 3 right now, and units 1 and 2 are in standby mode. Every ProElliot system has 3 optional inputs that you can use. Here, the customer's chosen to use to measure what milk temperature is coming out of the plate cooler, what the glycol temperature is coming into the plate cooler. This specific farm has a system called ProHeat 2.0. That's a proprietary heat recovery system, essentially recovering waste heat from the refrigeration system and making hot water that the customer will use as an energy saving device method to preheat water for the CIP system. A dairy farm needs to wash temperatures around 165 to 180 degrees. Here, we're doing the bulk of that load essentially with recovered energy that would normally just be wasted. Here again on your home tile, you can look at alarms. These are things that may have happened in recent history. And here's a few good examples. What this is going to tell you is when. This is on the 19th day of January 2021, and we had a temperature sensor alarm. It gives you as a producer some very simple actions that you might be able to take yourself, or if you call your service provider, you're able to more intelligently talk with them specifically about what's going on. Here, the other things that you'll get, now, when you get an alarm, you also get an email with that. Okay, so in your inbox, as soon as that happens, and as long as you're in the alarm state, you'll continue to get alarms saying that you have a problem. Alerts are the same type of thing. This particular system has no alerts. Alert is something to be aware of, but is not necessarily mission critical. It's not a failed device. It's not something that is going to stop the operation of the chiller or cause any product damage typically, but it's things you want to be aware of. Down here at the bottom, we're going to deal more deeply in tomorrow, or pardon me, on Thursday with Damon's session. But a high overview of this system data is, as the name describes it, it's the data of the system. Again, ambient temperature, you can look at it per circuit. If we want to remember, this one had 3 circuits. So we can look at suction pressure, inlet temperature, things that as a dairy producer may not be that relevant in your day-to-day activity. But when we looked at it earlier, unit number 3 was the one that was operating. So if your service provider says, hey, what's the discharge pressure? You can look at that and give him an exact reading in real time. Right now it's 184 PSI. We're only using 15% of the output. Just very basic readings that would be important to any service provider in troubleshooting your system or getting you some help. Parameters are a little different, and I caution everybody on this. And this is why you don't want to give access to everybody. And if you do have an employee leave, you want to remove his access to the system. These are actual settings. Most of these you can change. And when you go down here to the bottom of this menu and you hit save, you've made a change. So as a dairy producer, I would not recommend you changing any of these settings without your service provider's guidance or our technical service department. But again, it gives you very good basic information that helps you get help from a service provider, like what kind of refrigerant you're using, at what control point do your fans come on in your condenser units, when do they go off, rotation, all this type of thing. Again, day to day, not part of a dairy producer's life, but it could make a big difference. So this next thing takes a little bit to spool up, and the reason is we're bringing in an immense amount of data. In a very brief graphical chart here of these 4 measuring points, we're actually uploading over 13,000 individual data points. So it's a tremendous amount of information. Again, from a dairy farmer's perspective, it's probably something you would rarely do, or you'd only do under the guidance of a service technician or one of our service techs, either they're online or on the telephone. Here, it looks like a lot of information, but remember in the beginning, we looked at this system, it had 3 compressors. And each compressor has a high pressure side and a low pressure side. We know that unit 3 is operating right now, so we'll look at it. And if we only wanted to look at the high pressure side here from the current time at 4 p.m. On February 9th, all the way to the same period of time, February 8th, basically a 24-hour period of time, this is what the pressures look like on that unit, which in that climate with this load, very normal. The other part of the refrigeration circuit is on the suction side. And here, again, exactly what you would expect to happen. If we did have a problem and we really wanted to look at a very compressed period of time, a technician could really drill down Here, we're just looking at a few minutes of time and see exactly what was going on. So again, earlier we looked at an alarm. Let's say that alarm was in the heat of the day in the summer at 5 p.m. We can look exactly and see what was going on in that situation. So again, from a dairy farmer's perspective, probably something that you're not going to do every day. From a dairyman's perspective, the next thing and probably the most important part is going to what we call an operational report card. So here, this is basically a more detailed version of what the tile is. Up here gives you very good information when you're talking to a technician. The model number of your machine, its actual serial number is right here. Email, anybody that's logged in. So if it's the owner that's logged in, he would get the email. I could push that button right there. Now in my inbox, I'll get an email of this operational report card. If you want to just put it on a piece of paper, you can print it. So very easy, very user-friendly. Again, they're measuring 3 points in this particular system. This is a great feature. Very flexible, again, used for troubleshooting. Everybody wants to know if their glycol tank is full, so we put a gauge on there for you. And also, as you can see here, we are now looking at the last 30 days in 15-minute increments, and we're looking at the chiller fluid temperature. It tells me it got as low as 31 degrees, it got as high as nearly 37, and we can look at various points in time. If we know that at midnight, we always have a temperature problem, I could change this setting and tell me what the average temperature was at midnight. Again, this is a military time, and really we don't have any problem. It's no different than any other time of day, which is exactly what you want to see. Here you'll see the ProE7 chart, and it's going to be very familiar to every one of you who've been in the dairy business as long as I have. It is essentially a recreation of what we've always had in the dairy industry. This is part of what's known as the Pasteurized Milk Ordinance, or PMO, and it is the official way to record milk temperatures. It's a 7-day recording chart, starts at midnight Sunday, picks up, ends at 24 hours later. Nobody needs to be there to change it. It's already automatically changed and filed. Again, to look at a full piece of data, I can go back in time to any week I want. I'll go back to January, and there's a full reading of what goes on from a milk temperature of this farm. This particular farm doesn't go into a refrigerated milk tank. It's just going into a milk silo. For some of you, it'll be a tanker. Some of you will be a milk tank, and we'll look at an example of that here shortly. But I'm going to zoom in here. Nico, are you seeing the zoom on this?
You got it.
Yeah.
Hey, Steve, I think it's, I don't know if it's, there you go. Now, it was just taking a second to load that
Okay.
full 7-day chart there.
Great, great. Thanks a lot, Damon. So here we can see in this area during the milking process exactly what we want to see. The milk temperature staying exactly where we wanted. Then this is a 2-time-a-day milking dairy, so that we can see that every 12 hours they're washing. We know that because it's going all the way up to 160 degrees. And that's great. This dairy, obviously, from a temperature standpoint, has got great milk quality characteristics. When you got that hot of water, you don't have many problems. So they're doing a great job at this farm. But what I want to point out here, you can even see the wash cycles. Typically, the first cycle's a rinse. It's gone from that discharge line being at around 35 degrees. We warm it up to 80. They go all the way on the hot cycle up to 160. acid rinse is at tepid water. Then he sanitizes and goes back to milking. So again, just exactly what you want to see from a dairy farmer's perspective. Anytime you want to, you can save that as a PDF. And let me exit out of here. Now, under real fire here, I'm going to see how I can make this drawing go away.
All right. I don't know.
There we go. Magic,
There you
magic.
go.
Every time.
Learn
So
something
we'll go back here to the operational report time after that commercial intermission there. And you can look at anything. When you look at that chart, we were looking at the milk temperature. But this particular customer, you know, he also wants to look at his ProHeat 2.0, his heat recovery. Again, we'll go back in time here very easily, look at the calendar, go back to the same week we were looking at. We've stored all this data also. And this is exactly what you expect to see. The wash, we dump all the warm water, starting all over. It gets hotter and hotter and hotter during the cycle of milking cows because we're taking waste heat from the chiller, building hot water, we're dumping it again to wash. So again, we're just validating that the system's working well. Glycol coming in from the plate cooler to the chiller. And here again, you'll notice little bumps here. If we looked at the wash cycle again, that's just a little bit of that glycol water warming up. So very accurate recording of temperature done in real time. So these are probably the biggest things that a dairy farmer would look at. We'll look at another farm here that's always interesting for me because they're using it in a little different way. But what he likes to keep track of, this customer, when we put this system in, this is in a different part of the world. This is in Wisconsin. He had some limitations on well water, and he is keeping track of the cooling that is done only with well water. And with our plate design, we're able to segregate those two pieces, the glycol side and the well water side. So he's able to regulate his flow, and this is what's happening is during the milking process, he's going from 98-degree milk and he's going over to the glycol section at about 60 degrees. And that's tremendous. We can look at that. It measures the efficacy and how well we're doing recovering heat on that system and manage that to the best of our ability. When we go back here to the Trost dairy, we can look at that even here on our set points. We can look at what the fluid temperature is and the milk is going out. So the milk is at 34.3 degrees, and we know that the plate cooler is being provided with glycol at 34 degrees. You won't see that in very many dairy farms out there. That is, most of the time when you look at it, that's about a 1 degree differential, a little more. Typical, what you'll see is 5 degrees, but from the design of our plate heat exchanger and how we flow both water and glycol through an intermediate grid in the middle, that's how we're able to get the temperature of the milk so close to the temperature of the glycol. That's important to the dairy farmer because it's efficiency. That when we can strip out that much heat that effectively, that's the big win. So that really concludes the tour from a dairyman's perspective of the ProElliot system. Our near-term plans are to be able to make this a standalone machine as a way to record milk temperatures, particularly in milk tanks. I do have one dairy farm here before we adjourn or open it up to questions, looking at what a milk tank looks like. This is a more traditional farm near our headquarters in Washington. And we can see they keep track of their milk tank. We can go to the recording chart. Again, we'll go back in time here and look at full week's worth of information. That's a very typical dairy. I'll zoom in here a little bit, but this is a farm with 2 tanks. So what happens is the milk truck driver picks up the milk. The next shift comes in a couple hours later and starts the wash cycle. We get a good wash up to 140 degrees in the tank. Now he's still milking cows. He still milks almost 24 hours a day. It's just going in a different tank. That tank slowly cools off from the hot cycle until we start milking into it again. And the cycle just repeats. So this is probably for most of you a more typical type of operation, and more than just keeping track of cold milk. We're validating the CIP cycle. We're validating that the tank wash happens. We're looking at every function on this farm just with data. All this will be backed up to the cloud. So anybody you want to give this information to, it'll be available. Currently, it is not a replacement for the paper chart you have, but we have designed it in a way that it's 100% conforming to the regulations. Anyway, we appreciate your time, and if there are any questions or that we can provide for you, we open that up right now.
Great, folks. Any other questions from the group?
I have a question.
Yes, Lauren.
So say I already have a Pro Chiller. It's working fabulously, but I want to add capacity to that. And my system doesn't have PROElliot on it, and I want to get a module. Can I add PROElliot to my module that I'm ordering brand new? And will that tie into my existing system?
Damon,
Yes.
that question's so easy. I'm going to let you
I can answer that. Yeah. Hey, Lauren, absolutely. You bet you can. We would just incorporate all the controls and stuff would be on the module. So even if it was a system that had a different control scheme and maybe didn't have microprocessor, you'd still have those advantages with the new module, so that you'd be able to see all this your data and information remotely and live.
That's cool. And I can still use the extra sensors wherever I want.
You bet you can.
And I think we do a lot of updating of existing systems. So if you, your dealer or your service provider, you provide them the serial number of your machine, it may be a very simple update. Probably if your chiller was built in the last 4 or 5 years, there's probably a good chance it's a very simple update to add PROElliot to that system.
Great. Thank you.
Right, great question.
Yeah. Well, folks, I think we've done it. We got any more questions? I think we're good.
Great job, Steve.
Damon,
I
everybody,
thought
thank
you
you so
covered
much.
it well.
Well, thanks a lot, everybody. And again, especially thanks to our customer guests. It's really great to see you come up on that. And I would encourage everybody, get some of your service team people involved in Thursday's call with Damon. It's going to be the discussion that probably most of them are hungry for. So anyway, thanks for everybody. And again, Alyssa's going to do the magic and store this, and hopefully we can share it and post it later on. But thanks a lot to everybody.
Yeah.